Good afternoon, gamers. Welcome to another episode of Games with Dave. Today I'm joined by author and game designer Lou Anders. Lou is a Hugo Award-winning editor, a Chelsea Award-winning art director, and a critically acclaimed author with 25 years' experience working in genre entertainment. Today we'll be talking about Lou's current project, the successfully funded Thrones and Bones Noringard campaign setting for 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. Welcome, Lou. I'm honored to have you as a guest.
I am honored to be here. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. As an icebreaker and to kind of start things off, I do have to know, who's your favorite NPC that you're going to be introducing in Thrones and Bones Noringard?
Wow. It's there are several of them, but I think that one of my favorites is probably the Troll King. I'd established that trolls in Norengard have one or two heads, and a long time ago I realized that if they have one or two heads, then the Troll King obviously has to have three heads.
Interesting. I did see that backer tier, and I wish I could jump on that and be one of his heads.
Yes, right now we've only got one head spoken for, and I hope we get the other two before it closes. If not, I may have to throw my own head in the ring.
So first, congratulations on funding Noringard in 5 hours. How great of a feeling was that?
That was fantastic. Thank you. I didn't know what people were going to think, and we funded it, and we blew right past it on the first day, and that was just incredible. The
Awesome.
whole thing has been an amazing experience.
So, what was the catalyst for taking Thrones and Bones from a children's book series to a 5th edition campaign setting? Was it something you had always planned for?
I think so. There are several answers to the question, but to pick one of them, when I started writing, I had been an editor for quite a few years in adult science fiction and fantasy, and I was kind of nervous to take off one hat and put another hat on. You know, all my peers are writers, comic book writers, artists, TV people, and I was very confident being an editor in that field, but as a writer, that's new territory. That's something I've never done before. Oh my God, what if someone reads it? And I thought that that I could ease into writing by being being so rigorous in my research and world building that there was just a kind of authenticity to the project, regardless of whether or not I had any skill for it, if that makes sense.
It does.
So I wasn't writing the world so much as excavating it. And I did something which I totally wouldn't recommend, which is I worked out about 23 countries worth of material, like 40,000 words.
Wow.
Before I ever plotted anything. And, I started out thinking I would go easy and pick this isolated little corner of the world and do something Nordic and get to the roots of Western Germanic mythology before I took on anything further afield. And of course, as you start researching the Vikings, you find out they went everywhere. And so every time they went somewhere, then my mythological people had to go to an analogous place. And I ended up with detailed histories and religions and backstories on about 23 countries. And, and most of which you never see in the books. I mean, for the books, you only want the iceberg tip picking up out of the water, but because I knew what was below the water, I could write that tip. And so somewhere in accumulating all that stuff, I thought, well, I've got to do something with it, and a role-playing game would be the place for it. And I actually ran a fake core game for 2 years, set in a completely different part of my world. And for a while, I thought I would do something for Fate with that system, but I don't think that system lends itself as easily to long campaigns and a lot of detail. And when we switched to 5e, I started thinking then about doing something in 5e with it. And it was always a back burner thing that I wanted to do one day. And then the pandemic hit. And suddenly I'm like, well, I've got the time. Let's take a month and let's do like a little 30-page supplement and see if I can even do it. And now here we are. It's going to be probably 210 pages or more. And if we hit 20K, there's a second book. So
That's awesome.
Kind of grown, snowballed.
So how much from the novels has been ported over to the campaign setting, and will we see any characters from the books appearing as either NPCs or villains?
Well, a lot from the novels has been ported, although I've also, like I said, there was a lot in back of the novels that already existed, and then there's a lot more I had to create. So for the novels, for instance, I had already gotten a pretty good idea of what the city of Binsa looks like, which is the southernmost forward-facing doorway into the nation city, and that was done. But I had only mentioned some of the other cities, and others I hadn't mentioned at all. And so for this, I've created all 10 of the 10 major cities in Noringard. In terms of seeing people from the novels, all the monsters. And that was fun because, when the novels were written, they weren't written with Dungeons and Dragons in mind. They were my interpretation of Norse mythology into my world. So they're already one step removed from Norse mythology. And now I have to take what I've done with them and find a way to stat that out that makes sense in 5e. And that was interesting. Um, but for the main characters, originally I thought I would start stat Karn and Theana out, and I decided not to because you don't know where to do it. Are you statting them from the first book, the second book, the third book, somewhere in the middle? And I kind of like leaving them, I don't want to pin them down. I want to leave them free to grow. So more like minor NPCs show up, like Stolke, the guy who owns the mead hall in Bensa, and people like that.
Great.
They'll be there. I didn't stat out Orm the dragon or Helltopper the Draug because they're both almost demigods in their power, and I left. I don't think you mess with them anyway. So we have other Draug and other dragons to fight, but not those two.
Interesting.
Yep.
It sounds like quite the project.
Yeah, like I said, it was supposed to be 30 pages, and instead there's about 65 pages of lore, and then there's a huge chapter on classes, races, backgrounds, magic systems, special mechanics, magic items, spells, and then I've got it's a 29 monster bestiary, but I think I'm adding 2 more monsters to it right now, so it'll be 31 monsters. And then we've got the 2 adventures in the book, and now we're gonna have a second book with at least 4 and maybe 6 more adventures.
That's awesome.
Yep.
So is there any Norse mythology that you chose to draw from for the Noringard campaign guide that you didn't use in the children's books?
Oh, tons. We came up with a race of horses, the Sleipnar, that aren't in the books. And in the books, you only encounter one kind of troll. I know you're going to ask me about trolls later, so I'll save that. But we came up with a couple more kinds of trolls. I don't deal with Huldra, the people with the holes in their backs and the cowtails at all in the books, although I always plan to. And they're in there as both an NPC and a playable race. We knocking the fiddlers that try and drown you, or sometimes they appear as horses that try and drown you. They're in there. They weren't in the book. And one of my favorites is not Norse, it's post-Norse. There's an 18th century monster called a Valaravna. And it was written, like I said, it's 18th century, but it's someone in Scandinavia in the 18th century trying to create what they think would have been a cool Norse monster. So it's not historical to the Viking age. But when a Jarl dies and his body isn't recovered and he's left alone in the woods, and a raven eats his heart, it turns into a Valaravni, which is a hybrid wolf raven. And then it's obsessed with trying to find and eat a child's heart, because when it does that, it turns into a humanoid called a Valravni knight. And so it's this hierarchy that wants to progress up. And that's such a fantastic monster. It's like I said, it's not from the Viking time period, it's from later, but it's still a 200-year-old Scandinavian monster that feels Norse, even if it's not. And so you better believe that's in the bestiary.
That sounds like a horrifying creature.
It is.
So what do you think will excite dungeon masters the most about Norengard, and what do you think will excite players the most?
I hope the dungeon masters just the enormous amount of lore that I tried to give a really, really rich setting that's not just fun for me to write about, but that has conflict and story hooks, just threaded all through it at every opportunity. So I hope they look at it as a place they can take and make their own and tell whatever kind of story they want to tell. And I hope I've seeded the grounds with enough little plot hooks and bits of excitement that you can tell any kind of story you want to tell there. Players, we've got a group playtesting it right now on the Table Talk podcast, and they seem to really like some of the character options. I mentioned the Huldra Folk. We have a Huldra Folk player class that I think is going to be a lot of fun to play. And you can use a tail slap to smack people if they're not respectful. And I created the vulva. The vulva were the cirruses. They're mostly, but not entirely, female, and they were basically wandering witches. And I worked on that really, really hard for a while. The name means carrier of the magic staff or a magic wand. So I just had in my head that was a class of wizard. And after several failed attempts to make them into wizards, I realized they control the weather, they see the future, and they shapeshift, and they wander the land. And I realized they were a druid class. And so we have the circle of the vulva, and I love it. I think it's one of the things I'm most proud of. So I don't know. If I were a player, I would play a Huldra Folk druid, circle of the vulva.
That sounds really cool. I can't wait.
And they can tell the future.
So you'd mentioned one of the locations. What are some of the other locales in Noringard, and which has been your favorite to design?
Ooh, well, I just sent Rob Lazzaretti a 4th map commission since we just hit that stretch goal. And it's for the city of Windholm. And Windholm is one of the northernmost cities, and it's maybe my favorite. There's a mountain that's cleft by a waterfall. So you've got the mountain, but then you've got it's almost 2 slopes with a gap in the middle and a huge waterfall falling down between. And an ancient giant longship from the giant civilization that no longer exists, that disappeared thousands of years ago, is wedged perpendicular to the waterfall across the cleft.
Ooh.
And the town has grown up the slopes of the hill, and they use the giant longship like a giant bridge or a main street to get back and forth from one side of the town to the other. And the Jarl's Longhouse is right on top of the middle of the longship. And then the hull of the longship, there are businesses and things like the underground shops in Montreal or something. And there's an ancient dwarven temple that's been reoccupied and revitalized inside one half of the mountain. And then there's a spar of rock sticking out maybe 50 feet below the longship, but right out of the middle of the waterfall, that they use for Holmganger, the honor duels. So if somebody wants to fight a Holmganger, you put them in a bucket and lower them onto this tongue of rock sticking out from the waterfall, and then you pull the bucket up, and they have no choice. They have to fight to the death, standing on this spar of rock in front of a waterfall.
Wow.
Yep.
That sounds intense. I like the sounds of Windholm. So as we talked about a little bit a few minutes ago here, I did see the mention of trolls in a recent backer update. Can you tell me how the Norengard trolls differ from traditional 5th edition trolls?
Very much. They're well, one, they can go out in the sun. They're not affected by sunlight, but they come in 3 varieties. And part of this is because I went to Norway. I've been fortunate enough to go to Norway twice. And when you go there, you see trolls everywhere. And, and they have the little trolls that are in all the shops that are, a couple feet high. And I mean, they're models and toys, but they're sculpted to look like they're standing next to mushrooms or peering around stumps, so that you get the impression that they're about 2 or 3 feet tall. And then you've got the really big trolls, which would be in Dungeons and Dragons category large. And then I passed a mountain that had a skull on it that they said was a petrified troll. That's a gigantic troll. And I took a beautiful photograph of that. And it looks like, if you remember the Phantom, it looks like the Phantom's mountain with the Skull Mountain in Lee Falk's old stories. But it's so you've got all these different size trolls. You've got trolls that are mountain size, and you've got trolls that are maybe 8 feet tall, and then you've got trolls that are small. And so we broke that into cave trolls, forest trolls, and mountain trolls. And the cave trolls are mischievous. They're if you were a fan of the movie Frozen, they would fit right in there. They're not necessarily evil, but they're mischievous. They're annoying. They're cute. And then you've got the forest trolls, which are big ogre-like brutes with one or two heads that live in the mountains and the woods, but come out and raid farms and steal sheep and take slaves. And they have a city called Trollheim in the Imerian mountain range, and where the Troll King lives. And they come out to forage for food and slaves for Trollheim, which they think is the greatest city on earth. And then you have the mountain trolls, who are mountain-sized, and there aren't many of them, and they mostly sleep. So they're almost like the Tarrasque. If one wakes up, there's danger, but most of the time you never see them. But you could be climbing on a mountain and accidentally disturb it, because it's curled up on the side of the mountain and gone to sleep, and the grass or the snow has fallen over it, and it just looks like part of the hill. And then you start walking up the hill, and suddenly the hill starts shifting under you. And they're like a CR-24, I think. Maybe it's CR-27. And I love them, but you would not often see them very, very on a regular basis.
So note to self, use great care when climbing mountains in Noringard. What are some other unique monsters that you're excited to introduce in Noringard?
Ooh, well, I'm really proud of the way I did the Linorms, because in actual Norse mythology, the Linorms start out in their early tales like giant serpents. They're just big snakes with venomous bites. And then I think Fafnir is a much larger snake that can actually breathe poisonous gas. But then the Norse people start actually reading European literature, not just hacking and robbing for the people there, but actually paying attention to who it is they're robbing. And they hear about European dragons, and they think they sound pretty neat. So the later period sagas start having Linorms that can fly and Linorms that can breathe fire, which the earlier period sagas didn't have. And I wrestled with how to incorporate the different kinds of Norse dragons. If they were going to be different species, was it going to have to do one for each category? And it hit me that there's already a wonderful solution that's baked into dragons in 5e, and that is it's the life cycle. The wormlings are big, like 9-foot long snakes with venomous bites. When they become young, they learn how to ignite their venom and breathe poison. They learn how to breathe their venom as a poisonous gas. When they become adult, they sprout additional limbs and wings, and they learn how to ignite their gas and breathe fire.
That sounds awesome.
So the reason it's the later sagas that have the winged fire-breathing ones is because they had to, those were the older ones
that
lived long enough to appear in the later sagas.
So another thing I saw that looks so cool is the Thrones and Bones game arena. How fun was it working with Mike Sheridan and Andrew Mills to bring that to life?
This is an absolute blast. It was not something I planned initially. When we started the project, some people came on and said, "Are you going to make Thrones and Bones game?" And I always intended to include, well, for people who may not know, the book Frostborn, one of my two lead characters plays a board game called Thrones and Bones. And in real life, the Vikings played a game called Hnefatafl. And when I started the book, I thought I would just use Hnefatafl. But there's no one agreed upon rule set for that. They never wrote the rules down. And modern reconstructions can vary wildly, even to things like how big the board is, how many squares are on the board, or whether or not you use dice or anything. So when I was writing the first novel, I realized I needed my own rules, and it would be better if it were my rules. And so I quit writing, and I took about 2 weeks, and I built a board game. And my two oldest nephews were at the time chess champions, and I took them to Starbucks and put the game between them and let them play each other for 3 hours. And that's how I knew it worked and I had something good, when I had to pry it away from them. And so the rules for Thrones and Bones were in the back of the novel, and I they're in the lore section of the campaign setting. But then, we're on Facebook and someone says, well, you're going to make a set. And Mike volunteered. And Mike and Andrew both are amazing 3D designers who have already in the past made stuff at my urging. I love Fat Dragon Games 3D stuff, and I love their community. And I'll go on there and say, I need a wall piece that's shaped like this and has that sticking out of it. And somebody will make it that day. And those two guys I've designed stuff with them in that way before. And so they volunteered to do it, and it's been a blast. And they won't stop designing. We have the board game, and it's got two different kinds of frames. You can stick on a frame that looks like a wooden frame and has the Thrones and Bones logo on it, which is if you want to sit down at a table and play it like a board game. And then there's another frame that's made to look like stone arena seating that you snap on if you want to use it as a terrain piece and have your miniatures find themselves on a giant game board, as has happened a time or two in fantasy fiction.
It has.
And I read The Chessmen of Mars when I was maybe 11 or 12 years old, and I've never gotten over the giant chess set in that, or the fact that the rules for Jeton were in the back of the book. And so I've printed out, I don't know if you can see, but this is my, it's not going to catch very well, but I've got a printout sitting on my desk right now of the Thrones and Bones set, and that's just incredible. We haven't done a test. We haven't printed out the arena set yet because they're still working on the doors. It's going to have two huge arched wooden doors with dragons carved into each one. And they're almost ready to print out. So I hope I can get one printed and painted to show off before the Kickstarter ends. But and then Andrew won't quit. He decided to make trays that fit inside the frame that hold all the pieces.
Oh, wow.
Yep.
So everything's all self-contained and
Yep. It'll hold all 23 pieces and the 4 torches the optional LED torches that go on the sides.
I saw those. That thing looks so cool. I cannot wait to print one myself.
I just spray painted I just primed the torches, so I'm gonna assemble them tonight.
Nice.
Yep.
So another thing with Noringard is the maps, and I was wondering how many are included in the virtual tabletop set you're making in collaboration with Heroic Maps.
There are over 20 maps in the first set, and it depends on for some of the town maps he's given you templates of the interior of buildings you can lay on top of the map or over the map. So there's like 20 or 22 maps depending on if you count those templates.
Cool.
And they're gorgeous. And then if we unlock this hardcover, there'll be another 20 maps in a second map pack for the second book.
Awesome.
I love Heroic Maps. They were some of the first maps I started using when I got back into the hobby, when I was playing the aforementioned Fate games. And I love their style. I've always wanted to work with them.
That's awesome. Excuse me. And speaking of the maps, the ones that I've seen via Kickstarter and the updates are absolutely gorgeous. What has it been like working with acclaimed cartographer Rob Lazzaretti on this project?
Rob is wonderful. I started working with him when I was doing the books. Back when I was an editor, I had an author named Erin Hoffman, and we were working on a novel. And she said, "Lou, I'll have a map for you in a few weeks." And I said, "Erin, you don't have to do a map for me. We'll do your own map. We pay for maps." And she's like, "No, I want to do the map myself." I said, "We will pay for your map." And she goes, "You understand? I want it to be my map. I want it to be exactly what it's supposed to be, and I don't want it wrong. I'm doing the map." And I always felt guilty that she paid for her map. No one else paid for their map. And then the minute I sold Frostborn to Penguin Random House, I went, "Oh my gosh, Aaron's a genius. I'm going to do my map. I don't want them doing a map and saying, 'This is your map.' And my going, well, you got that wrong and that's in the wrong place." And then going, "Sorry, this is the map. That was the budget." So I called up Rob Lazzaretti then and asked if I could hire him to do the maps. And he and I did, we were doing those maps, and then I got to take the trip to Norway. And so I was going out and photographing bits of the landscape in Norway during the day and emailing him at night and showing it to him. And then he was sending me back map revisions based on the stuff I was seeing in Norway at the time, which was just an incredible experience. But he's done a lot of maps for me that haven't been seen yet, because we did maps for the second and third book. At this point, I knew one day I was going to do a role-playing game. And so I've got city maps that have never been displayed from the third book. They won't be in this Kickstarter because they're Greek and they're Swiss and they're Holy Roman Empire type stuff. But I hope we get there because they're gorgeous. But for this one, we've got the map of Binsa and the map of Noringard, which we're revising for the game, adding some more locations and some more detail. And then he's going to do maps of 4 more cities on top of that. So there'll be
Awesome.
5 cities in the country map.
That sounds awesome. So another thing that you've also unlocked is adventures to be included in the book by Brian Suskin and Jeff Lee. What can you tell folks about those adventures?
Well, the way we're going to structure them is the book itself starts with 2 adventures, and they'll be for first and second level. And then I'm going to write a third adventure to kick off the start of the second volume if we get there. And then Brian and Jeff's, and then whoever we unlock. If we unlock Ben, and there may be someone else waiting in the wings. And the adventures are going to be loosely connected. So they start out in the city of Binsa in the middle of summer, and they work their way west and north and right up the middle of the country, and also into the colder season. And so we want to structure them so that they'll take characters from first to 7th or 8th level, and actually form the basis of a loosely connected campaign that takes you on a sightseeing trip and hits the major sites and hopefully all the major monsters. I know Jeff Lee said he wants to write about Linorms.
As long as we stay away from mountain trolls.
Yes. Well, we just created the Google. I want to work one of those in. We just created the Google Docs shared document yesterday to start coordinating who's tackling what parts of the world.
Awesome. So you are under $2,000 away from unlocking the final stretch goal at the moment. What can you tell folks about the 2 $20,000 stretch goals?
Well, it's, you remind me, I haven't obsessively checked Kickstarter while we've been talking. Sometimes if you don't keep hitting refresh, it doesn't go up. They don't tell you that, but if we unlock the second volume, it's going to be about 100-page book, and the PDF is free for everyone who's a backer, and at $20 and up. And the hardcover will be an add-on, probably priced at $25, depending on what the page count ends up being. And it's going to be gorgeous. And like I said, we're going to take it as a. And also we've got the 9 people who paid for the reward tier to be part of the Ravens Guard, the Special King's Guard, and I want to see if I can find a way to work them into the adventures, so they're not just name checked, but they actually have something to do with the storyline, and which might be me writing a 4th adventure to put at the end of everything, which is where we might see a mountain troll.
Well, those were all the questions that I had. Is there anything that you'd like to add that we didn't touch on?
Please back the project. Let's make it as good as it can be.
I'm with you.
And just that I think I'd like to talk about, I want to make sure people understand the books are children's books, but they were always written to be like The Hobbit, to be in the sense of an all ages book. And I want to make the game the same way. So the game is not a children's game. It's children friendly in that there's no salacious material in it, but it's not children focused. I mean, there's some pretty scary, look, we talked about the Valravne that eats children's hearts in order to evolve, and there's some pretty scary stuff in it. There's also a lot of funny stuff in it. I like the way I like media that can jump back and forth between humor and horror and adventure, and be as rich as the real world, be whatever you need it to be for your play. So I think you could if you were a fan of the books, you could buy this game and play it with your kids and they'd have no problem. If you don't if you can't stand children, you could buy this game and play a really grim, dark Viking experience and fight undead and, horrible, horrible monsters and have a completely different experience. I want it to be a really rich Norse inspired world, but it's its own world. It's not just let's do the sagas. And also, I hate. I'm looking at that poster of Hoth behind you, and with apologies to Hoth, which is one of my favorite planets in the entire universe. I hate monoplanets, and I don't like it when someone writes a story and there's just one country and nobody interacts with anybody outside their borders. And this is just a piece of an enormous world. And even in this game, I think you see the influence of the nearest cultures and even some faraway cultures on Norengard. There are people and things in this game that come from elsewhere. And I hope that we do well enough that I can come back with another book about another one of the countries in the world, or perhaps a whole section like a region guide.
That would be fantastic. So
Yes,
get
it
out
would.
there and back this project, folks. We want to get more campaign guides out of Lou. So I'd like to do, Lou, is let you take a moment and tell folks where they can find you and your other projects on the web and social media.
Well, I'm on Facebook. You can follow Thrones and Bones at Facebook, has a page, and that'll be it's a catch-all page for all my projects. And I'm on Twitter at Lou Anders. Also on Instagram at Lou Anders Author, and other social media platforms I may or may not be on, or I probably don't use enough to make it worth following me on. But Twitter and Facebook are the main ones.
All right. Well, thank you again for joining me today. And I wish you the best of luck going forward with the last few days of Noringard. And I look forward to getting the books.
Thank you so much. I appreciate this.
Thank you.